Hi, I'm Mary Woodruff. I'm a graduate student at Indiana University Bloomington, and I'm in my third year working towards my PhD in biology. So by the end of my graduate studies here, I'll be a doctor of biology. I'm originally from a small town in New Jersey called Flemington, and I did my undergraduate work at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, and eventually made my way out here to Bloomington, Indiana to pursue studying how animals are responding to environments that are challenging for them. And particularly, I study birds with the Roswell Lab. Our lab is run by Kim Roswell, and we study a whole host of different behaviors and physiological mechanisms that facilitate those behaviors in a species called the tree swallow, which is a bird that migrates up to North America to breed in the spring and then migrates down to Central and South America to overwinter. Tree swallows are an amazing species to work with, not only because there's a large amount of studies that have already been done on them, so we already know a lot about their biology and life history, how they live out in nature, but there's also a lot of things that we don't know about them yet, a lot of things still to be curious about. One of those elements that we don't know about yet is their breeding range in North America has been moving, and we don't know exactly why, especially because it's moving in a direction that we wouldn't anticipate. It's shifting south. And so when you think about climate change is elevating temperatures, and so you would think that most animals want to move north or higher up mountains in order to get to cooler temperatures that are more ideal for them. But in the last 20 or so years, the tree swallow breeding range in North America has been shifting south, which means that their populations in Canada that used to be large are shrinking, and their populations in North and South Carolina that used to be small are growing each year. And as biologists, we think, how is that possible when so many other species are struggling amidst these warmer temperatures of climate change? How are tree swallows able to seemingly thrive in these warmer environments? And I'm hoping with my time here at IU, I can study the mechanisms, the physiological mechanisms and the behavioral mechanisms that tree swallows use to acclimate and adapt to thermal challenges like heat waves. It's also my goal that my work here at IU can help contribute to how we think about animals responding to climate change and how we might develop strategies in order to preserve populations and conserve species. So my work is an initial step in understanding how one animal is responding to climate change. And hopefully that can be added to a larger amount of data of many species that can contribute to conservation efforts.
The Bales Road Research and Teaching Preserve, which is one of the many research and teaching preserves that IU has across the Bloomington area. It's a great resource for field biologists such as myself to come and study the plants and animals that live at these sites. So in our lab, the Roswell Lab, we study tree swallows, which are a local bird that live in cavities, both natural and human-made like this box. So we study tree swallows when they're nesting here in the spring, if you want to come take a look. And we're able to do this by actually creating these boxes which open and the birds nest inside, and so we can not only monitor the success of each nest, but we can do some experimental manipulations. So I study how birds respond to heat when they're inside the nest box by creating an experimental heat wave inside the nest box and heating the birds for 6 days, and then looking at both their behavior and physiology.
To look at chick behavior, I actually put a GoPro in the corner of the nest boxes, and so I was able to record parents coming in and feeding the chicks, and I recorded the chick behavior itself and looked at the degree to which the chicks were begging throughout the experiment, as well as some thermoregulatory behaviors like how much they were panting on a given day or how spread out they are in the nest, because you can imagine that being really crowded to your siblings would be warm, so I actually found that chicks spread out a little bit when they get hot. And then for the physiological side of my data, I mainly look at gene expression of heat shock proteins, which are these amazing proteins that are upregulated in the body, so increased in amount in the body when you're going through heat stress. And they act to combat some of the negative effects of heat by repairing the proteins in the cells that might be damaged by the heat. So they act as a protective mechanism for birds, and we have them too as well, so it's pretty cool to see parallels between humans and birds. So in order to look at heat shock protein gene expression, I work in our lab and I use what's called a thermocycler to run a quantitative polymers chain reaction, which basically means I'm able to look at the DNA of each of these birds and look for specific gene sequences and see how much of that particular gene sequence is in my DNA sample. So I'm able to quantify how much heat shock protein is in these particular samples, and in that way I can compare my experimental birds to my control birds and see how they compare in these heat shock proteins.
To do all of these studies, we work with Indiana University's Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee to make sure that we're keeping best practices when working with these animals and reducing our impact on them.
A PhD in biology, specifically working with wildlife, can open a lot of doors to you. And while most graduate students enter thinking that they will be going on an academic path to be a professor at a college or maybe a high school teacher, there are lots of options for what you can do with your PhD, including working for government services like the Environmental Protection Agency or the EPA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Geological Survey. All of those different agencies within the government work on protecting endangered species, work on enforcing government regulations to protect our environment and the wildlife that we have. There are also opportunities to work for nonprofit organizations that might be dedicated to protecting wildlife, such as consulting firms that act as experts on a particular species or a group of wildlife that might be affected by like a construction project or a highway development or something that's going on in an area where they need an expert in order to make sure that they're keeping best practices and preserving the wildlife that's in an area. So in that case, you as the person with a PhD in biology would be helping them make sure that they're also protecting the wildlife in that area. I personally came into grad school wanting to be a professor at a small liberal arts college, really similar to the one that I went to college at, because I was able to form such close relationships with my professors and get involved with research during my undergraduate years. And I wanted to be that type of mentor to other people. Right now, that's something I'm still really passionate about, but I'm starting to explore my options of what I could do with my PhD, such as working in a nonprofit or a government agency like I talked about. So I'm really excited to see where the next couple years of my PhD will lead. All right, so it's Monday morning and I'm all set up at my desk, working from home like the rest of the lab right now. And a typical day for me usually involves reading recent studies that relate to my interests or my research topics. I also spend a lot of time writing either drafts of manuscripts or grant applications or abstracts that'll be submitted to a conference. A lot of what I do is also analyzing data that I've collected over the past summers when tree swallows are, here in North America before they migrate down south. I also, with the lab, have weekly meetings where we talk about our work or recent work that relates to our research. And we give each other advice and feedback on what we're thinking and how we can progress on our different projects. And it's really great because we're so supportive of each other that it feels like you're a part of the team that's working to pursue really interesting research questions. And I definitely couldn't be as far along in my studies without such a supportive group. Another aspect of grad school is teaching. So right now this semester, I am an associate instructor for the Biology of Birds class. So I mainly help set up and teach the lab sections. And it's a really rewarding experience because I'm able to answer questions of the students and hopefully get them excited about the topics that they're learning about. I'm obviously pretty passionate about birds and am a birder myself. So seeing them learn to identify local birds is a pretty cool experience, because when they get excited about it, it's pretty cool to just see their interest in a topic grow over the course of a semester. So in my personal life, I really enjoy cooking and trying out new recipes. I like hiking and exercising. And I also have a cat who is pretty great and learns a lot of new tricks. So that's a lot of fun too. I would definitely say that grad school is a lot of work. You need to know how to time manage and to keep going. But overall, it's been an incredibly rewarding experience that I don't think I could have in any other setting. My lab here at IU, the Roswell lab, Kim, and all of the other grad students and undergrads that work with us are just an incredible team, and I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks for joining me.